Good afternoon, everybody. Wow, that was pretty amazing. I wish I had some sort of artistic skills so I could do something like that. I'm Rick Eichstead. I serve as the policy advisor for the RTOC. I'd like to just introduce quickly the speakers for our next panel. Gail Killam is the principal with Water Policy Pathways, which is a water consulting firm that advises tribes, local government, and nonprofits. Brian Crossley is the Water and Fish Program Manager with the Spokane Tribe. And Raymond Paddock, we've seen Raymond before this morning. Raymond is our RTOC Tribal Co-Chair.
Hi, Rick, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, this is Gail. Thanks so much, Rick, and everyone here. I'm honored to be here to talk about a resource in the works that we hope will be useful to tribal members, tribal NGOs, tribal governments, or even tribal corporations. Are the slides up? Any chance? Oh, there we go. And with that, you can go perhaps to the next slide. Thank you. I'm a longtime resident of Oregon. I worked for nonprofits here, both here and nationally since the mid-90s. I think of myself as a translator of water policy concepts, kind of getting the jibber jabber, making sense of the regulatory jibber jabber. I've been honored to tribes across North America, but also had some focus time in New Mexico with the Pueblos and in Alaska with Native villages. A lot of my work is really about improving how the US federal water quality law of the Clean Water Act is implemented locally and how people interact with it. And with that, I want to recognize Shauna Larson's eloquent discussion earlier about the disconnect between laws and regulations and the original instructions to Indigenous populations. It is really some of what we hope to connect in this guide in some ways, but it is a challenge. We're going to start with a story from Spokane Tribe's interaction with this Clean Water Act. Well, I'm so pleased to have Brian Crossley with us, and he's going to help us with that.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Crossley. I'm the Water and Fish Program Manager. Been with the Spokane Tribe for over 20 years and have had the privilege to work on many different projects. And my first one was getting our water quality standards approved. I did not write them, but it was a process to get them through EPA and iterations, and I think I went through 3 different staff members at EPA before they finally got approved. But anyway, just a little bit of background. You see, Spokane Indian Reservation is at the bottom of the Spokane River as it joins the Columbia River, and our standards were first approved in 2003. And when we first proposed the standards, not wanting to rock the boat, we used the recommended subsistence fish consumption rate of the 86.3 grams a day. But then upon our revision of our standards, we bumped that up to what truly historically the Spokane Tribe would consume, which would be much more than that. We would consume 2 pounds of fish roughly a day, and that's 865 grams. And then it got coined as a term as a heritage consumption rate. We didn't use that, didn't propose that, but that seems to have stuck, and I'm seeing that used throughout. Anyway, so to talk a little bit about the Spokane and our water quality standards and with regards to PCBs. Standards are written to focus on human health criteria as well to protect those uses in the water bodies, and something that PCBs create an issue with is that PCBs are man-made. They're persistent, they bioaccumulate, in fish, and like I said, they can change forms, and there's lots of different nuances about PCBs. But they were banned in the U.S., but we're still seeing products with them in with levels of PCBs that are far exceed our standards. And so it's become a large issue. And just to kind of give it a little bit of a background, we're at the bottom of the Spokane River, but when we sample fish out in our waters just adjacent to us, we see elevated PCB levels as we saw, as they've seen in the Spokane River throughout. But anyway, the river, the permits were developed, and the Spokane tribe intervened, as you can see in the slide, in a lawsuit that basically said we want, instead of maybe a direct plan to implementation, we intervened in a lawsuit that says, well, we want a TMDL, and we want to have real levels and real targets. Go ahead and next slide. So just to give you a little bit, here in the picture on the left side is my hand. It's about 6.5 grams a day. And if you're from the state of Washington, that's what you're going to consume a day. And you're going to be like emaciated if you were just going to rely on that for fish today. And then the 86 grams a day, you can see my ring, and then basically two fillets that basically gives you an idea of, that's still, if that was all you were eating, that would be pretty slim pickings. And go ahead and next slide. And you can see above there, if you had 6.5 grams a day, you could have 170 picograms a liter of PCB concentration. If it was 86.3, it drops down to 3.37 picograms per liter. And then I just grabbed this picture here, and that's roughly 2 pounds of fish, or 865 grams a day. And like I said, that was a large part of the diet, and is becoming again a large part of the Spokane's diet, just with us, being able to go get fish in the mid-Columbia. But it was always, the tribe was a salmon tribe, and that was a very important part of the diet. So go ahead to the next slide. So as you can see, in our water, we're at the bottom of the river, or bottom of the river essentially. And when we propose standards, there's criteria that have to be at least considered and measured in upstream discharges. And so just to give a kind of a scale of where you're at, you can see we're in the eastern part of Washington, right? And then the Spokane River comes, the headwaters, at least in the Coeur d'Alene River, comes out from Idaho and then empties into Washington. And Washington was always, well, we've got to meet the tribe standards. It's in their standards that they meet downstream sources. And so we have, but that's also what Idaho standards say. And our standards, maybe if we're the Colville tribes below us, if we were to discharge something, it has to meet that downstream, the standards of the downstream state or tribe in this instance. And so by having those standards such developed, has caused some angst in a lot of dischargers, and they've went through some iterations and some planning activities in how to meet dissolved oxygen criteria. And our criteria wasn't much different than the state, but then also they knew PCBs were coming, and what were they going to do to with PCBs. And it wasn't until the city or the Spokane County put in a state-of-the-art membrane filtration plant, and lo and behold, they could remove well over 90% of the PCBs. That's not what it was designed for, but it actually caused, those were the results. And since they put that into effect, all the other dischargers couldn't argue that it couldn't be done. And so now all the systems, even throughout in Washington, up through the city of Spokane and even into Idaho, have adopted tertiary treatment. And some of the highest levels of treatment in the nation are now occurring in the Spokane River, and especially for industry like Inland Empire Paper. In this instance, Kaiser's still coming along, but like I said, a lot of the other municipal dischargers have gone to membrane filtration because of the low levels of phosphorus and ammonia and the PCB reductions that they can get. So, yeah, so, and I think that was the only slides I have, Gail, and I'm going to turn it back to you to continue, and then if I missed anything, then that could have happened. So
Thank you, Brian. That was perfect. And I'll take the next slide, please. That example of the Spokane tribe exercising their rights to set a more stringent standard for something like a forever chemical, the PCBs that never go away and have such impact on the fish that are being consumed downstream. It helps me to explain my efforts to work with RTOC to develop a playbook or a guide, a resource that can identify opportunities that, such as the idea of more stringent standards, to take advantage of this U.S. federal Clean Water Act law that many tribes have already tried or are doing in different places. There's a 50th anniversary for this U.S. federal law coming up in the fall, and anniversaries are an opportunity to shine a light on the challenges that have where the act has not been applied equally or consistently, and I think this is a chance for us to identify the ways that it is in conflict with tribal priorities and original instructions, as was mentioned earlier today, suggesting not just old but new ways that tribes may wish to take advantage of the act is also an opportunity. Laws are imperfect. They're a product of the time that they were developed, and the challenge is that they need to be pushed, and identification of where the challenges are, and pushing those challenges in various ways, identifying them and creating ways for how to make sure that they are working better the way they were intended. There's lots of resources. EPA has developed a lot of resources, as have many organizations and other tribes across the country. So with this resource, we hope that we will be able to compile websites and online documents and examples that I think really will bring to light some of these opportunities, the challenges, and the opportunities, including legal, administrative cases where tribes have tried something different. Next slide, please. What I hope to really hone in on is not just the official paths, and there's already been some discussion about consultation and the challenges of that. The idea Brian referred to, the amount of time that it takes to develop standards and have them officially approved by the US EPA can be decades. And the idea that participation in the processes that exist at a local or state or federal level and where tribes can interject is there. There's also the opportunity for lawsuits, and both tribes and individuals can take advantage of that. In the unofficial side, the recognition of already developed internal standards and programs that may not be officially adopted or approved at the US federal level. How can those recognition of priorities be incorporated into ways that the tribes get involved in these processes? I'd like to also recognize in both of these paths, the contribution of traditional knowledge is it can and must be part of it to better understand and incorporate tribal priorities. And with that, I want to turn over to Chairman Raymond Paddock, who has already been very busy today, and I really appreciate his willingness to join this conversation to talk about the Indigenous Guardians Network, with which he's been very involved in its establishment. So next slide.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you, Brian. I hope everyone's not getting tired of hearing me yap, but I appreciate the offer to sit in on this discussion and discuss a little bit about this program that we're developing in Southeast Alaska called the Indigenous Guardians Network. And it's a program we're modeling after First Nations in British Columbia, where they've been able to collaboratively work with the Canadian federal government as well as the BC province to essentially create co-management and co-governance of their natural resources and their environmental issues. I'll just read briefly the mission to empower every Southeast Alaska tribe and community through the support of education, monitoring, and equip Indigenous guardians who practice environmental stewardship using traditional knowledge. And that's kind of what we're aiming for in this development of this Guardians program, is to essentially develop that sovereignty and stewardship through co-management and co-governance. We're still very young in this development pieces, but we have invited, again, as you see in the mission, that Southeast tribes is involved. So there's, I believe, 18 or 19 federally recognized tribes in Southeast Alaska. And we're working to bring them all on to implement this program, where we're able to create credible science and use credible science, but to also implement the traditional knowledge that we care so much about. And in doing so, these credible science projects include like water quality monitoring, which you see some of my co-workers in the bottom picture there are doing. We operate a program called the Transboundary Water Quality Monitoring Program, which you've heard some people talk about in Idaho, Washington, and Montana area, but we also have it in the Southeast Alaska area as British Columbia borders Southeast Alaska. So we're doing these monitoring programs where this mining boom's happening. But we're able to have that credible science, and we want to use this Guardians program to essentially have the traditional knowledge. You heard Gail talk about those unofficial paths and options for the tribes, and these are some of the steps that we are taking right now. We currently have an agreement with the Forest Service to essentially help develop and build this program. Granted, it's not the key piece to it, but in order to change policy and hopefully have that treatment similar to states, we're collaborating in this effort to develop out this program. We hope to be able to use this in government-to-government consultations as those official paths, or participation in federal and state involvement. Having that credible science behind it, but also implementing our traditional knowledge is a key piece to ensuring good policy change or affecting policy change, if you will. And last but not least, and we hope it never gets to that, but is the litigation path. And those are the things we always try to avoid, but having that data is a key piece. And mind you, this isn't just in regards to water quality, but we also want it to be about cultural information. What our traditional people already knew about the waters that we lived on and that we relied upon, that we use. And so this is again, this is a developmental program right now. We're really building out, and we have an agreement with the Forest Service to do this. But the bigger piece of it is the sovereignty aspect that we're looking to build. We know that using grant agreements isn't the best way to approach your sovereignty, but so we're looking to have these partners create an endowment, which right now we have $20 million in that endowment. And of course, by next year, we want to double that endowment to 40 million and 100 million later on, and have that into perpetuity. And the reason for that is the sovereign piece. And unfortunately, we live in times where we're only as sovereign as how much money we have. And in doing so, we can't do that on an individual level. We need to collaborate to do that. And that's where we're building out this partnership with other Southeast Alaska tribes. And hopefully we can use this model for other tribes in the lower 48 and in Alaska to use. we're seeing this already develop in Western Alaska with their Sentinels program as well. So this is a model, not just alone to us, but many tribes are starting to use to enhance their programs and to have that traditional knowledge implemented in their programs. So again, back to that sovereignty piece, what we want to be able to use those dollars for is once we create a governance structure behind all the tribes that are involved, not just the tribes, tribal NGOs, other organizations that have shared interests throughout our region is involved. And we hope to get municipalities involved too. And in the long run, we want this to be something that we can work with the state of Alaska. Right now, many of you know or may not know that the state of Alaska just does not recognize federally recognized tribes. We feel this path is an opportunity to really gain that credibility and essentially kind of give them no choice but to recognize the work that's being done on the tribal level. Again, these are just ways of hopefully reaching those unofficial paths, as Gail mentioned in the slide before, but I'm hoping I'm hitting the keynote scale. If there's anything I might be missing, please let me know. I know this is a really short introduction or preview of the Guardians program, but I'll have more time to talk about this later on in the week. But yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for joining so that we could hear this much about it. And I do hope that folks check in with you later on more details. Next slide, please. The tie-in of not just the Spokane standards, but also the Indigenous Guardians Network that Ray talked about is really are examples of what we can provide as ideas or resources for others to hear about. And with this last couple minutes, I'll just say that we do hope for a more interactive dialogue with any of you who are interested. And in the next month, I'd love to set up, and Randy has talked about helping us set up a conversation for anybody who would like to offer thoughts about what needs to be included, examples of other ways that either tribes have tried to and been frustrated with using or interacting with the Clean Water Act, or even more importantly, the internal mission and vision and standards that have been set that we could elevate up to talk about how other ways that they could be used during these processes. I'm all ears. You can message me through the WOVA platform that the conference is being held through, or next slide. One more slide, please. Thanks. For all three of us, if you have any questions, those are our emails outside of the platform. And I very much thank my co-presenters, Brian and Ray, for their help to get these thoughts across. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. I don't know if we may have a couple minutes for questions, but other than that, I'm open to entertaining them offline. Thank you.